The evening was quiet when Mira got off the small city bus. She stood on the empty road, holding her cleaning bag tightly. In front of her stood the old Hillview Hospital, a huge building that had been closed for more than 10 years. The paint was falling off the walls. The windows were covered with dust, and the gate made a long creaking sound whenever the wind blew. The place looked lonely and forgotten. But tonight it was her workplace. Mira was a single mother. She lived with her 7-year-old son, Ryan, in a small rented apartment. Life had not been easy for her. She worked in a cleaning company and often took extra shifts to pay the rent and buy groceries. That morning, she had received a call from her supervisor offering her a job that paid double the usual amount. The job was simple: clean the front area of the old Hillview Hospital and organize some boxes in the storage room. The only problem was that no one else wanted to take the job because people said the hospital was haunted. But Mira didn't believe in such things. She needed the money, and she didn't have the choice to say no. "We can't afford to be scared," she whispered to herself as she pushed open the gate. An old security guard was sitting near the entrance. His name tag said Karim. He looked up when she entered and gave her a tired smile. "You must be the new cleaner," he said. "Not many people are brave enough to work here at night." Mira tried to smile back. "I'm not brave, just broke," she said softly. The old guard chuckled. "Be careful inside. The power goes out sometimes and some doors are stuck. If you need help, my office is right here." "Thank you," Mira said, and walked inside the hospital. The moment she stepped in, the air felt cold and heavy. The big hall was covered with dust, and her footsteps made soft echoes. Broken chairs were lying in corners, and old papers were scattered on the floor. She turned on her flashlight and slowly started her work. She cleaned the reception desk first, wiping away the thick layer of dust. On the ground, she found a nameplate that said Dr. H. Naveed. She placed it carefully on the desk again. Every sound around her felt louder in the silence. The distant tap of water, the squeak of metal, and the soft hum of wind through the broken windows made her feel uneasy. But she reminded herself that it was just an old building, not a scary one. After some time, she took a short break and opened her small food box. She sat on the edge of a counter and ate quietly, looking around. The hospital had once been a busy place. She could almost imagine the people walking through the halls, the nurses talking softly, and children laughing in the waiting area. Now, only her voice and footsteps filled the space. When she finished eating, she stood up again. Her flashlight flickered for a moment and then turned off. She tapped it gently until the light came back. The light landed on a nearby wall, and something strange caught her eye. There were words written in faded red paint. It said, "Do not open the basement door." Mira frowned. "Basement door?" she whispered. She had heard from the other workers that the basement was closed off years ago. No one was allowed down there. She brushed away some of the dust and saw the writing clearly. It looked old, not fresh. Maybe someone had written it long ago as a warning. Trying not to think much about it, she turned away and kept cleaning. But when she walked near the old elevator, something shiny on the floor caught her attention. She bent down and saw a small metal key. It had a hospital tag attached to it that read, B1 Storage. She held the key in her hand and stared at it for a long moment. B1 must mean the basement level, the same basement the message had warned about. Her heart beat a little faster, but she smiled nervously to herself. "It's just a key," she whispered. "I'm not here for stories. I'm here to work." Still, she put the key carefully in her pocket. Somehow, she felt it was important. As she continued cleaning, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Why was there a key lying near the elevator? Who dropped it? And what was inside the basement that people didn't want to open? Outside, the wind blew softly, making the doors creak. Mira looked up at the long hallway that disappeared into darkness. Something deep inside her told her that the night would not be as simple as she had thought. She took a deep breath and whispered again, "We can't afford to be scared." She had no idea that the small key she had picked up would soon lead her to a hidden secret worth $153 million. Mira continued her cleaning work for another hour, but her thoughts kept returning to the small key in her pocket. Every few minutes she touched it, wondering why it was lying near the elevator. She tried to ignore it, but her curiosity grew stronger with time. The hospital was large and quiet. The sound of her broom brushing the dusty floor echoed down the empty hallway. Once in a while, a door moved slightly with the wind, making her stop and listen. But she reminded herself again and again that she was alone and safe. When the clock on the reception wall showed 9:30, Mira decided to take a short break. She walked to the guard room near the entrance where the old man, Karim, was sipping tea from a small cup. "Everything fine inside?" he asked, looking up at her. "Yes," Mira said, trying to sound calm. "It's just very dusty and a little cold." Karim nodded. "This building has been closed for many years. There are rooms even I haven't entered. The basement, for example, it's locked. No one is allowed there." Mira's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated for a moment, then asked slowly, "Do you know why the basement is locked?" The old man shook his head. "I only know what people say. They say some years ago, the hospital was working on something secret. Some files and boxes were kept in the basement. Then one night all of it was closed down suddenly. The next day everyone was told to leave. No one knows what was inside." He looked at her kindly. "Don't go near it, my child. Some things are better left alone." Mira smiled faintly and nodded. "Don't worry. I just want to finish my shift and go home." She thanked him for the tea and returned to her work. But as she walked past the elevator again, she looked down at the dusty floor and saw the faint outline of old footprints leading toward a side hallway. They were covered partly in dust but still visible. Her curiosity started to take over her fear. Maybe the footprints were from workers who came here long ago, or maybe someone had been inside recently. She followed the prints slowly until she reached a metal door at the end of the hallway. The paint was faded, and a small sign above it read "Basement Access." The door handle was rusty, and there was a small keyhole right under it. Mira took the key out of her pocket and held it in her hand. The tag said, "B1 Storage." She stared at the door and thought about the message on the wall, "Do not open the basement door." Her heart was telling her to walk away, but her mind was curious. What if there was something valuable left behind? The company might reward her for finding it. She smiled nervously at the thought. Still, she whispered softly, "Just one look, nothing more." She placed the key into the lock and turned it slowly. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked open. The door moved a little, and cold air brushed against her face. She switched on her flashlight and looked down the stairs. The light showed a long staircase leading into the darkness below. She took a deep breath and stepped down carefully. The air smelled of dust and old metal. The walls were lined with pipes and wires, and her footsteps made small echoes. When she reached the bottom, she saw a small room with metal shelves and a few wooden boxes stacked in one corner. Mira walked closer and saw that most of the boxes were covered in plastic sheets. One of them was half open, showing old paper files inside. She picked up a file and wiped away the dust. It had hospital stamps and handwritten notes. The title on the front said, "Research, Phase 3, Confidential." She didn't understand what it meant, but she noticed something else. Inside the file, there was a photo of a large metal locker and a small paper with numbers written on it. The numbers looked like a code. Before she could look more closely, she heard a faint sound behind her, like something light falling on the floor. She turned quickly, shining her flashlight around, but there was nothing there. Only shadows and old boxes. She laughed softly to calm herself. "Maybe it was just a mouse," she whispered. She placed the file back in the box, but kept the small paper with the numbers. Something told her it might be important. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket next to the key. As she walked back up the stairs, she felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. She didn't know what the file meant, or what the numbers were for, but she was sure now that there was more to this hospital than anyone knew. When she reached the main floor again, she locked the basement door behind her and looked once more at the words on the wall. "Do not open the basement door." She smiled slightly and said under her breath, "Too late for that." What she didn't know was that the small paper in her pocket was the first clue to a mystery worth $153 million. The next morning, Mira sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the folded paper she had found in the basement. The numbers written on it were neat and clear: 47, 21, 19. She had no idea what they meant, but something about them made her feel that they were important. Her son, Ryan, was sitting beside her eating breakfast. "Mama, why are you looking at that paper again?" he asked softly. Mira smiled and folded it back. "It's just something I found at work, Ryan. Maybe it's from an old locker." "Nothing special." Ryan nodded, though he could tell his mother was thinking deeply. After he left for school, Mira sat quietly for a while. She couldn't stop remembering the files in the basement and the cold air that came from the room. Something inside her wanted to know more. That evening, she returned to the hospital for her second night shift. The company had asked her to finish cleaning the record room and another small area near the west wing. When she reached the hospital gate, Karim, the old guard, was again sitting in his chair, drinking tea. "Back again?" he said with a smile. "Yes," Mira replied. "I need to finish the work today." He nodded. "Be careful again and don't go exploring that basement. Some things are better when left alone." Mira smiled politely but said nothing. She didn't plan to tell him about what she had found there. Inside, the hospital looked the same as before: silent, dusty, and dark. The flashlight's beam moved slowly across the hall as she walked toward the west side. The air was colder that night, and the sound of wind passing through the broken windows filled the empty space. As she worked, she kept thinking about the numbers. Maybe they were a locker code. The photo inside the file had shown a metal locker, and she remembered there were none in the basement. So where was it? Maybe it was somewhere else in the hospital. When she finished cleaning one of the rooms, she decided to check the storage area near the old pharmacy. It was a small space filled with broken shelves, empty bottles, and old drawers. While dusting a corner, her flashlight reflected off something metal. She moved closer and saw an old locker standing against the wall. Her heart started beating faster. She brushed away the dust from its surface and found faded letters on it. Medical research, authorized staff only. The locker had a number dial, just like in the photo from the file. Mira's hands trembled slightly as she took the folded paper from her pocket. She turned the dial slowly: 47, 21, 19. For a moment, nothing happened. Then there was a soft click. The locker opened. Inside, there were several small metal boxes and thick envelopes tied with rubber bands. Mira picked up one of the envelopes and opened it carefully. Inside were old documents stamped with the hospital logo. The papers were about fund transfers, medical projects, and equipment purchases. But one line caught her eye. It mentioned a large amount: $153,000. Her eyes widened. She checked another paper. It mentioned something about a hidden account under the name H. Naveed, the same name she had seen on the nameplate at the reception desk. Mira sat on the floor, staring at the documents in surprise. Could this be true? Could that much money really be connected to this hospital? Maybe it was a secret fund that never got reported when the hospital closed. She felt a rush of excitement and fear at the same time. If this was real, someone might have hidden it here years ago. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound again, the soft creak of the hallway floor. Her flashlight moved quickly toward the sound, but she saw nothing. Maybe it was just the wind, she told herself, though her heart didn't believe it. She quickly placed the papers back in the locker and took one envelope with her as proof. Before leaving, she turned the dial again, locking the locker shut. On her way out, she whispered to herself, "No one will believe this. I need to find out the truth first." When she stepped outside, Karim noticed she looked thoughtful. "Everything okay?" he asked kindly. "Yes, all fine," she replied quickly, hiding the envelope inside her bag. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept looking at the papers and the name H. Naveed. Who was he really, and what happened to that money? She decided that the next day, she would go to the city library and look for any news about Hillview Hospital's closure. She had a feeling that what she found would be the beginning of something much bigger than she ever imagined. Before going to bed, she whispered again the same words she always said when afraid: "We can't afford to be scared." She didn't know that the secret she had just uncovered would soon bring people into her life who had been waiting years to find those missing millions. The next morning, Mira woke up early. The sunlight entered her small apartment, but her mind was still filled with thoughts of the old hospital. She looked at the envelope on her table again. The papers inside mentioned a name, Dr. H. Naveed, and a huge amount of money, $153 million. It was unbelievable. After sending Rian to school, she decided to visit the city library. Maybe she could find something about the hospital's history. The library was quiet and smelled of old books. Mira walked to the information desk and asked the librarian politely, "Excuse me, do you have any newspaper records about Hillview Hospital?" The librarian nodded and pointed her to the archive section. "All old newspapers are kept there. You can check by year." Mira thanked her and began searching through the old files. Dusty newspapers were stacked neatly in folders. She looked for articles from 10 years ago, the time when the hospital had closed. After half an hour of searching, she found a small article on the last page of a newspaper. The headline read, "Hillview Hospital closes after sudden financial trouble." She started reading carefully. The report said that the hospital had shut down unexpectedly. The reason given was financial mismanagement. It also mentioned that the hospital's main director, Dr. H. Naveed, had disappeared suddenly after the closure. The article said no one knew where he went and the investigation had stopped after a few months. Mira's eyes widened. So the director who disappeared might have been connected to the missing money. Maybe he had hidden it before leaving. She quickly took a few photos of the article with her phone and left the library. Her mind was spinning with thoughts. If she could find proof of where the money went, maybe she could report it to the authorities or maybe even get a reward. That evening, when she returned to the hospital for her shift, she carried a small notebook and pen with her. She wanted to note every clue she found. As usual, Karim greeted her with a kind smile. "You look busy today," he said. "Yes, just trying to finish everything fast," she replied. She didn't tell him about her search. Inside, the hospital was even quieter than before. Her flashlight moved slowly across the dusty floors. She went straight to the record room near the west wing and started checking the shelves. Many of the files were old, but one thick file stood out. It was labeled Director's Office Records. Mira opened it carefully. Inside were reports, bills, and letters. One paper caught her eye. It was a letter signed by Dr. H. Naveed himself. The letter mentioned a special project funded by private investors and said that large amounts of money were moved into a research fund. The last line said, "All remaining assets are stored safely under my personal supervision until further instructions." Mira stared at the words for a long moment. Could stored safely mean the money was still hidden somewhere in the hospital? Maybe the basement was only the beginning. Just then she heard footsteps in the corridor. She quickly closed the file and turned off her flashlight. The sound was slow and steady, coming closer. She waited quietly, holding her breath. A shadow appeared near the door, and then Karim's voice said, "Mira, are you here?" She sighed in relief. "Yes, it's me," she replied. He stepped in with his own flashlight. "I thought I saw lights in this room. Just checking if you're okay." "I'm fine," she said, trying to sound normal. "Just finishing the cleaning." Karim nodded slowly. "Good, it's getting colder tonight. Be careful. These old walls make strange sounds." After he left, Mira sat down for a moment, thinking about everything. Maybe it was not safe to continue her search alone, but the thought of discovering the truth gave her courage. Before leaving that night, she went again near the elevator and looked at the basement door. It was locked, just as she had left it. She touched her pocket, feeling the small paper with the code still folded inside. When she returned home, she couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Naveed. Who was he really? Why did he disappear? And if he had hidden the money, could it still be inside that hospital after all these years? She took out her notebook and began writing down all the clues she had so far. The key labeled B1 storage. The paper with numbers 47, 21, 19. The documents showing $153 million. The name Dr. H. Naveed. The letter saying,
"Stored safely under my supervision." When she finished writing, she looked at her notes and whispered,
"It's like a puzzle." Ryan came out of his room and saw her writing. "Mama, are you working again?" he asked. She smiled and closed the notebook. "Yes, but it's an interesting kind of work." Ryan hugged her and said, "Don't get scared, okay?" Mira smiled warmly. "We can't afford to be scared, remember?" She hugged him back, but deep inside, she knew the real story of Hillview Hospital was just beginning, and she was standing right in the middle of it. The next day, Mira couldn't focus on anything else. Even while cooking breakfast for Ryan, her mind was full of thoughts about Hillview Hospital. The name of Dr. H. Naveed, the missing money, the files, and the strange basement, all of it stayed in her head. After Ryan left for school, Mira decided to take a small step. She went online and searched for any record of Dr. Naveed. There wasn't much, only a few old articles. One mentioned that he was a respected medical researcher and had started a special health project before the hospital shut down. But after the closure, he was never seen again. Some believed he left the country. Others said he stayed hidden in the city under another name. That made Mira even more curious. Maybe his secret is still inside the hospital, she whispered to herself. That evening, she returned for another night shift. The bus ride felt longer than usual. She kept replaying every clue in her mind. When she reached the hospital gate, Karim greeted her as always. "You're working hard these days," he said kindly. "Most people wouldn't come here so often." Mira smiled faintly. "I just like finishing what I start." Inside, the hospital felt colder than before. The air was heavy and the halls were darker. Mira started cleaning the north side where old records and lab rooms were located. The flashlight beam moved over cracked walls and broken doors. After an hour of cleaning, she noticed something strange. Behind one large metal cabinet, there was a narrow space in the wall, almost like a hidden door. It was covered with dust and paint, but the outline was visible if looked at closely. Her heart started to beat faster. She pushed the cabinet aside, coughing as the dust filled the air. Then she ran her hand over the wall and felt a small metal handle hidden under the paint. Carefully, she pulled it. The wall opened slightly, revealing a narrow stairway leading down. It wasn't the same basement she had visited earlier. This one was smaller and hidden between walls, as if someone didn't want it to be found. Mira hesitated for a moment. She remembered Karim's warning. Some things are better left alone, but curiosity was stronger than fear. She switched on her flashlight and started walking down the narrow stairs. The air was cold and smelled of old paper and metal. At the bottom, she found a small room filled with locked cabinets and boxes. The floor was covered in dust, but everything seemed untouched for years. Her flashlight moved over the boxes, and she noticed a small golden plate on one of the cabinets. It read, "Director's Locker Room, authorized access only." Mira's eyes widened. This must have been Dr. Naveed's private storage area. She tried to open one of the lockers, but it was locked. She looked around for a key and then remembered the one she had found earlier, the key labeled B1 Storage. She took it from her pocket and tried it in the locker. The key turned with a soft click. Inside the locker were several brown envelopes and a small metal box. Mira opened one of the envelopes carefully. It contained old receipts and letters. One letter caught her attention. It was written in Dr. Naveed's handwriting. It said, "If someone finds this, remember that the truth was never about money. The funds were meant for research to save lives. But greed destroyed everything. I hid the remaining amount where no one will look. If the hospital ever opens again, let honesty find its way back." Mira read the letter twice. So the money wasn't stolen for selfish reasons, it was part of a project. But where was it hidden now? She looked at the metal box next. Inside it was a small silver USB drive and a faded photo of a large hospital machine. On the back of the photo was a note that said, "The answer lies under room 12. Mira quickly wrote everything down in her notebook. "Room 12, she whispered. She remembered passing by that room once. It was on the east side of the hospital. Before leaving, she placed everything back carefully and locked the cabinet again. Then she climbed the narrow stairs and closed the secret door behind her, pushing the metal cabinet back to hide it. When she returned to the reception area, Karim was walking by. "You look tired tonight," he said. "Yes, just a long day," Mira replied with a smile. As she walked toward the exit, she touched her pocket where the USB drive was now safely kept. Her heart was racing. She didn't know what was on it, but it could hold the real secret of the $153 million mystery. Outside, the night sky was full of stars. Mira looked up and said softly to herself, "We can't afford to be scared." She didn't realize that someone from the old hospital records department had already heard about her cleaning job, and they were quietly watching her moves. The next morning, Mira sat near the window with the small silver USB drive in her hand. She hadn't slept much. The letter from Dr. Naveed, the secret locker, and the line written on the photo The answer lies under room 12, kept playing in her mind. She didn't own a computer at home, so she couldn't see what was inside the USB drive. She thought about going to an internet cafe after dropping Rian at school, but a part of her felt scared. What if the information inside was too big or dangerous to handle alone? After sending Rian off, she went to a small cafe nearby and asked the owner politely, "Can I use your computer for a few minutes?" The owner nodded. Mira sat down, plugged the USB drive in and waited. There were only 2 files inside. The first one was named Project Hope, and the second was Account Summary. She clicked on Project Hope first. The file opened slowly, showing pages of reports and medical research notes. The words were full of medical terms, but one thing she understood clearly. The project was about creating special equipment to help patients with serious heart problems. It seemed like Dr. Naveed had been working on something very advanced for its time. Then she opened the account summary file. Her eyes widened when she saw the numbers. The total funds listed were exactly $153 million. The report showed that the money had been moved to several accounts, and one of them was marked as Hillview Trust, Room 12. Her heart raced. So the clue on the photo was not just a random note, it was real. Something connected to that money was hidden under Room 12 in the hospital. Mira quickly copied the files to her phone and returned the USB to her pocket. She thanked the cafe owner and left, feeling both nervous and excited. That night, when she reached the hospital for her cleaning shift, the old guard Karim greeted her as usual. "You look thoughtful tonight," he said. Mira smiled softly. "Just tired, that's all." She didn't want to tell him what she had discovered yet. She needed to be sure first. Inside, the halls were dark and silent. She made her way to the east side, where room 12 was located. The room door had a broken lock, and the sign on it was almost falling off. She pushed it open gently and stepped inside. The room was empty except for a few metal cabinets and a broken hospital bed. The air smelled of dust and old paint. Mira turned on her flashlight and looked around carefully. She checked the walls, the floor, and every corner. At first, she found nothing unusual. Then, near the center of the floor, she noticed a small square mark, slightly different from the rest of the tiles. It looked like it could be opened. She knelt down and tapped it gently. The sound was hollow. Her heart started beating faster. She used the metal handle of her mop to lift the edge of the tile. It came up slowly, revealing a small hidden compartment underneath. Inside, there was a wooden box wrapped in plastic. Mira carefully pulled it out and brushed away the dust. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside were several small notebooks, each marked with a date. The first one had a note written by Dr. Naveed. "These are the remaining records of Project Hope. The true fund is hidden safely. Only those who wish to use it for good will find it." Mira opened another notebook. It contained bank details, addresses, and handwritten codes. She didn't fully understand everything, but she knew this was important evidence. Suddenly, she heard soft footsteps outside the room. The sound made her freeze. She turned off her flashlight and stayed quiet. The footsteps stopped near the door but didn't come in. After a moment, she heard the sound fade away. She waited a few minutes, then quickly put the notebooks in her cleaning bag and placed the tile back where it was. Before leaving, she looked around the room one last time. "Thank you, Dr. Naveed," she whispered softly. "I'll make sure your truth is known." When she stepped outside, Karim was walking down the hall. "Still here?" he asked kindly. "Yes, just finishing," she replied, trying to sound calm. As she left the building, the cold wind brushed against her face. She looked back at the dark hospital. The mystery was no longer just about money. It was about a man's dream that had been buried and forgotten. She walked home slowly, thinking about what to do next. Maybe she should go to the authorities, or maybe she should talk to a reporter who could tell the story to the world. But one thing she knew for sure: she couldn't stop now. At home, she placed the notebooks and the USB safely inside a box. She looked at her sleeping son and whispered, "We can't afford to be scared." Mira didn't know that someone else had entered the hospital that night after she left, and they, too, were searching for the same hidden truth. The next morning, Mira could barely concentrate on anything. The hidden notebooks, the USB drive, and the secret under room 12 had filled her mind with questions. She made tea and sat by the window, thinking of what to do next. Her son Ryan was playing quietly with his toys. "Mama, are you still thinking about the hospital?" he asked. Mira smiled. "Yes, but don't worry. I'll take care of everything." After sending him off to school, she sat down with her notebook. She carefully reviewed everything she had found: the key labeled B1 storage, the number paper 472119, the secret locker room, the USB drive, the hidden notebooks, and the note from Dr. Naveed. Every clue seemed connected, like pieces of a puzzle she had to solve. Mira decided to start by checking the addresses and bank details written in the notebooks. She needed to see if any of them were still active. She went to a quiet cafe with her laptop and began searching. Most of the addresses led to empty offices or buildings under renovation, but one address caught her attention. It was an old warehouse not far from the hospital. Her heart raced. Could this warehouse be the final location of the hidden funds? She took a deep breath and wrote down the address. She knew she had to see it for herself. That night, after finishing her cleaning shift, she decided to walk near the hospital on the way home. The city lights reflected softly on the wet roads. Mira couldn't stop thinking about what she might find. The envelopes, the notebooks, and the codes, they all pointed to something bigger than just money. As she walked, she remembered the number paper 472119. Maybe it wasn't just a locker code. Maybe it was a combination she needed for the warehouse. She quickly jotted it down in her notebook. The next day, Mira decided to visit the warehouse during daylight. It was a small, quiet building with tall metal gates. The walls were old, but the place looked empty. She walked around carefully, looking for any clue. At the back of the warehouse, she noticed a small metal door that was locked. The lock had a number dial. Her hands trembled slightly. She turned the dial carefully, 472119. There was a soft click and the door opened. Inside, the warehouse was dark and empty except for a wooden crate in the middle. Dust covered the floor and the air smelled faintly of wood and old paper. Mira's flashlight illuminated the crate. It was old but sturdy. She lifted the lid carefully and found several smaller boxes inside. Each box was labeled with a date and the words Project Hope. Her hands shook with excitement. This was it, the final location. Inside the boxes were envelopes filled with papers and some sealed containers. Mira realized that these were the remaining records and funds Dr. Naveed had hidden. It wasn't just money. It was evidence, research, and the proof of his project. Suddenly, she heard a soft sound outside the warehouse, a door creaking and footsteps. Mira froze. Her mind raced. Could it be someone else looking for the hidden funds? She quickly closed the crate and stepped back, trying to stay calm. She peeked through the window and saw no one. Maybe it was just the wind. Still, she felt a shiver run down her spine. She whispered to herself, "We can't afford to be scared." Mira knew she had to move fast. She gathered as many envelopes as she could carry and placed them in her bag. Carefully, she closed the crate and locked the small metal door again. Walking back toward the main street, Mira felt a mix of excitement and fear. She had finally reached the last clue. The $153 million mystery was not just about money. It was about Dr. Naveed's hidden work, his research, and the secret he had protected for years. When she reached home, she placed everything safely in a box. Ryan ran to her, smiling. "Mama, did you finish your work?" "Yes, Ryan," she said, hugging him. Everything is safe now. But deep inside, Mira knew the journey was not over. The hidden truth was in her hands, and she had to decide the right way to reveal it. She could go to the authorities, or she could find a way to honor Dr. Naveed's project. She looked at the envelopes and whispered softly, "We can't afford to be scared." Mira didn't know that someone had been quietly watching the warehouse. The secret of Project Hope had not gone unnoticed, and her next steps would be crucial for the safety of the hidden discovery. The next morning, Mira sat at her small kitchen table with the box of envelopes, the USB drive, and her notebook. She had spent the last few nights carefully reviewing everything she had discovered. The Project Hope records, the hidden funds, and the secret work of Dr. Naveed were all in her hands. She knew this could change everything, not just for her, but for the truth about Hillview Hospital. Ryan ran into the kitchen, carrying his school bag. "Mama, are you still working on your project?" he asked. Mira smiled and ruffled his hair. "Yes, Ryan, but this is an important project. It is about honesty and helping people." After sending him off to school, Mira called the local authorities. She explained that she had found important records and documents hidden from the public for years. They were surprised, but promised to send someone to verify the information. Later that afternoon, 2 officials arrived at Mira's small apartment. Mira carefully showed them the USB drive, the envelopes, and the notebooks. The officials examined everything with interest. They asked her questions, and she explained step by step how she had discovered the secret from the abandoned hospital. After hours of discussion, one of the officials smiled. "This is incredible. Project Hope was thought to be lost forever. These documents, the funds, and the research can now be restored and used for its original purpose. You did the right thing by finding them and keeping them safe." Mira felt a wave of relief. She had not only solved a mystery but also ensured that the hard work of Dr. Naveed would not go to waste. The next few days were busy. Mira worked with the officials, giving them details about Room 12, the hidden locker, and the warehouse. They checked everything carefully and confirmed that the $153 million funds had indeed been hidden in secret. As part of Dr. Naveed's Project Hope. News about the recovered project and funds soon spread. Local newspapers wrote stories about the single mother who had uncovered one of the biggest mysteries in the city. Mira's bravery and careful work were praised by many, and she felt proud, not for herself but for making sure the truth was found. One evening, Mira returned to the abandoned hospital one last time. The halls were still dark and quiet, but now they felt peaceful. She walked to room 12 and placed a small flower on the floor where the hidden crate had been. It was her way of thanking Dr. Naveed for his work and for trusting that someone would care for it. Karim, the old guard, appeared at the gate. "I heard the news," he said with a warm smile. "You really did something amazing here, Mira." She smiled back. "It wasn't just me. It was about following the clues, being careful, and not being scared." The next day, Mira returned to her normal routine. She continued working at the cleaning company, but life had changed. She had earned recognition and respect for her honesty and courage. More importantly, she had secured a future for Rian. Rian came home from school one afternoon and ran to her. "Mama, they are talking about you at school. Everyone says you are brave." Mira hugged him. "We can't afford to be scared, Ryan. Sometimes being brave means doing the right thing, even when it is hard." Weeks later, the authorities announced that Project Hope would be restored, and the funds used to continue the research that could help many people. Mira received a small reward for her discovery. But what mattered most to her was that the secret dream of Dr. Naveed was alive again. She looked back at the abandoned hospital from a distance, feeling proud and grateful. The building, once quiet and forgotten, had kept a secret for many years. Thanks to her courage and determination, the truth had finally come to light. That night, as Mira tucked Rian into bed, she whispered softly, "We can't afford to be scared, and we never will." She knew that no matter how dark or mysterious a path might seem, courage, curiosity, and honesty could guide anyone to the truth. And for Mira and Rian, this was only the beginning of a life full of hope, lessons, and the strength to face any challenge. The story of Hillview Hospital and the $153 million mystery had come to an end. But the lessons it left behind would last forever.